All right, so here we are. Thank you for joining me. I'll be talking about the 7 densities that make up our universe and our own consciousness on a scale from least conscious, which is the first density, and that first density has the most least amount of awareness and light per square cubic inch. So the higher you go in density, the more light you have per square inch in your awareness. For instance, we have bodies and we also have minds, and in order for us to gain more light, which is intelligence, which is photonic particles, we need to bring in a higher degree of awareness. And this light quotient that makes up our awareness and that makes up our reality is completely dependent upon what state of consciousness we can experience and exude in our lives. So I talk a little bit about the first 4 densities in my book, The Nature of Thoughts, and while I'm going to shamelessly plug my book, I want to also talk about the higher densities and how they can be a little applied to you directly in your life, because even though we operate primarily in 3rd and 4th density right now, we can apply the qualities of 5, 6, 7 for us to accelerate our consciousness and our growth as human being, and eventually as a planet, as a collective species, which I'll be getting into is the 4th density. But without further ado, I'll just begin. The previous universe stems and originates from the black hole in the center of our galaxy. And what I mean by universe is definitely galactic because that galaxy that we live in is ultimately under its own laws, under its own frequency lock and dynamic relationship to matter, and it has its very consolidated and strict laws. So the previous universe I don't know anything about, but it could be said that the first density in our universe, which is the elements, which is fire, water, earth, and air, they are the beginning of material or manifest energy, manifest consciousness as pure beingness and awareness. And awareness is a loose term because it is not aware yet of itself. As elements form material like planets and mountains and rock and stuff, all those elements are competing in a way against each other, and as matter floats in space, so to speak, it is only aware of itself until another object or another material substance comes along and collides with it, and therefore interacting with it and communicating with it so that it can become more aware of itself. And the elements that over millennia, over millions of years, when they're forming a planet, when they're forming a physical manifestation of the planet, then they start to rub up against each other, so to speak. So the the earth element hardens after the fire element is the first element, and that is the molten rock that forms a planet, and then it goes into rock as it cools down, and because it from the air, the atmosphere that it produces, it cools it down more and more, so it becomes more dense, and then we eventually get to the second density, which is growth and movement, which is water. However, before I get there, I want to talk about how this friction between elements, between the fire, water, earth, and air, are all ways for the elements to become aware of themselves. Because if rock did not meet another element, say for instance air, then it would not know its own identity, so to speak, because the way that air carves into rock, it makes the rock molecules and the rock consciousness, which doesn't know it's a rock. Rocks have consciousness, but they don't know that they do. They don't know they are consciousness. It's just pure beingness, pure awareness, and this is the first density. So as they carve, the air carves into rock, and the fire scorches the earth and creates new mountains and from tectonic plates and volcanoes and whatnot. Each element becomes more aware of itself. So consciousness in that collection of that sphere or that planet then becomes more evolved, more refined, and it evolves into growth and movement. It evolves into organic life. This organic life is, in a sense, it doesn't really know that it is self-aware yet, but it knows that it can move and it can experience as something separate from just being. It can experience movement. So what we see in microorganisms, and we see in plant life, we see in bacteria, all the first biological life that we experience is second density consciousness, and that's where its consciousness starts to know that it is alive in a way, and it completely runs on survival instincts. So our survival instincts essentially come from the growth and movement density, the second density. So when we look at plants and when we look at bacteria and microbiomes, microorganisms, we look and see that they actually do have their own patterns and their own rhythms and their own intelligence that they move from. So it's more intelligent and more conscious than the earth, wind, fire, and water density, where it's there. But as earth, wind, and fire and water evolve, they become more and they rub up against each other, and they kind of compete for their own movement. As they move and cause friction with each other, they become more aware of themselves, because through friction we gain more self-awareness. And this goes to the survival instincts in the terms of us starting to feel that there's an external force that is impacting our own range of motion. And this goes to, into the third density, which is self-awareness, and into how reflecting on other entities and identifying this is me and that is you, we experience a kind of separation. And from the second density, we start to understand that I am here and you are there. And that is the separation consciousness, the initial duality that we kind of experience in second density. But to harp on a little bit more second density stuff, we basically so there in each density there's a seven sub-densities. So if we look here, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in each density, and they interact with each other, and they all kind of blend in with each other. So they all kind of blend in with each other, and they can be accessed at any place in time, because when you start to realize higher density concepts and that you are not confined to time space, because in the first, second, and third density, we feel like we're confined to time space. And our lessons are very much impinged upon us and influencing us to conduct ourselves within the confines of time-space. But when you realize higher density concepts and higher density truths, we can understand that point A is no farther, point Z is no farther away than point B is if we're point A. If that hopefully makes sense. There's no really greater distance to where we are now to where we are going to go or where we are going. And those lessons in first, second, and third density are all teaching us about time space. And might I add, there's in each kind of quadrant of densities are all grouped together. So we get to interact with intelligence. If we're, for instance, living in third density, three-dimensional reality, we get to interact primarily on a conscious level, on a more conscious level, with second and first. And if you are living in fourth density, you get to interact with 5 and 6 density consciousness, and that allows us for greater growth and for us to also help second and first density consciousness because we are their teachers and they are our teachers, and they're helping us become more self-aware. And that goes great with the example of our own pets. Domesticated animals are a way for us to teach that form of consciousness, which is the animal, which is the pet, how to be aware of itself by calling it a name, by giving it food the same time every day, by repeating its name and giving it love and affection, and giving it making it more aware of itself. We can accelerate that form of consciousness into a higher state, which eventually will become third density. And pets that are have gone through and learned the lessons of unconditional love, kind of, to experience that, and after they have grown out of survival, and after they have grown out of debilitating instincts that keep them on the survival state, they can experience higher degrees of love, of pure acceptance, and they don't need to operate from that instinctual level anymore. So that allows them to grow in consciousness. It allows them to become more aware of themselves, because they're not trying to find food all the time, because it's being provided by them, to them, by their masters, by their owners, and we're their teachers in a way. So knowing that we have that second density, that influence on second density consciousness, and might I add that the second density, it's not black and white. There is a mixture and meshing of densities all together, all in one area, but the illusion that they are all separate is what I'm pointing out here, kind of, because we can jump 3 to 7 in a quantum leap, but it requires us to have no limitations. So that is a little bit difficult, because we are so wrapped up in the mind and the illusions of mind. So knowing that these numbers, numerical representations of dimensions, is only a signpost and a guidance for us to understand consciousness on a bigger level, in a more applicable context, will allow us to experience more free will, more choice. And that leads into the third density, which is self-awareness and choice. And this self-awareness that we experience on a third density human being level is that we are an ego, and we are different from the other ego. And the more we disidentify from that ego and disidentify from our separation from another ego, the more we can consciously choose to make who we are into a reality. So instead of living so much from the mind and conceptually living inside of this idea, this ego, that who we are is, my skin, my race, my age, my ethnicity, my looks, my appearance, all those things are all illusory still. Even though it is that way in physical reality, you can also choose something else. And that choice is to be, essentially, at the very basic level, is to be grateful, to be happy, to be pleasantly accepting of what it is that is beingness, is awareness in the third density. So understanding that we have a way for us to experience life in a totality of acceptance and love and wisdom and light, we can then understand how we better make choices that are generous and helping to others. Because in the Law of One, which this is where I've got this material, I was inspired by it, and I highly recommend it for anybody looking to understand the complexities of multidimensional reality and consciousness. From this law of one material, I experienced that there is, in essence, it's not as black and white as it sounds, but there's two paths for you to choose as an individual. There's service to self, which is self-absorbent, it's selfish, and it's not a bad or negative thing. It's just so that it basically boils down to taking away others' joy for your own joy and your own well-being in your service to self orientation will take away people's joy in order for you to feel more joyful. So it's heavily reliant on other people. It's heavily reliant on consciousness of other people to feed your own consciousness and your own self-awareness. And it's not good, bad, right, or wrong. It's a perfect and beautiful expression of infinity. And if you do not respect and honor that choice made by individuals and beings who want to be service to self, then you are effectively becoming service to self, because in that separation and that identity that you are separate from the other, and that you have to survive and you have to feel good about yourself through the deprivation or the extinguishment of other beings' joy, is a way that you can sustain a higher degree of free will. And we even look at, the corporate leaders and CEOs of the world who are extremely wealthy, and they are, they're making decisions that impact a lot of people, and those decisions are on a large scale, in helping them more than it is helping everybody else. So, and it's very effective. We have to give them that it is really extremely powerful, and they are choosing that choice they're choosing that based on free will, and the universe, the intelligence, doesn't discriminate. It does not judge whether free will is good or bad. It recognizes that the being knows what it wants, and that is intelligence, that is consciousness, and the consciousness that is reflected upon itself, that is only capable of seeing what it can do for itself, is service to self consciousness and polarization. So the more that we reflect on what it is our own needs are and what makes us feel good and stuff like that, the more service to self we are. However, you can't be service to others, which is the positive polarity, unless you understand that it is okay for you to know your own needs, and know that you are worthy. And self-worthiness is really important to serve other people, because if you're not confident, you cannot be generous. And if we are to become more service to self or service to others orientation, and that means positive, it means giving other people more consciousness through your own actions, behavior, and words, then you can accelerate your own conscious growth as a positive polarity individual and being. And just for a great example, Jesus was a wonderful example of that service to others, because he did not. He was homeless, and he was giving away his consciousness, his gifts that he worked so hard at attaining, to other people through the service of them. Celebrating with them, or giving them guidance and counsel. So learning that the service to others path is a positive one, and it requires you to also consider your own inclusion into the group, because if you don't include yourself, then it is incomplete, because you are a part of the whole. So it's not black and white as it sounds, and hopefully you are sticking around to hear this portion of the video, because this is important. And the inclusion of the self is just as important as the inclusion of others. So service to others does not mean that you're self-sacrificing. It means that you are more streamlining in a more direct and powerful way your own ability to determine your self-worth and determine that you are worthy of serving others. And this is an inclusion. It's not a separation. It's knowing your own needs and being honest with those needs. Because if you are not truly honest with yourself about what you need, then you are gonna become more selfish and encumber and accrue more and more attachment. So basically, all this comes down to is attachment and non-attachment. So the less attached you are to outcomes, to materials, to relationships, the more you become lighter, and the more generous you can become with your energy, your attention, your awareness, and share what it is, because sharing is your way to salvation, in a way. And it's a way for you to distribute your intelligence in such a way that will allow for greater unification. And we're tapping into 6th density material here, so I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But anyway, 3rd density awareness is that of choice and self-awareness, and we have to make the decision on whether we're going to choose service to self or service to others intentionally and consciously. And this leap and this jump from 3rd to 4th density is giving us the opportunity to choose that. And we're experiencing a great shift with the rise of the internet and higher connectivity and communications between the globe and nations and individuals. With the onslaught of technology, it has allowed us to share and create more with each other and be more of service to others. So let it not be a question in your mind whether the planet is going towards service to others or service to self, because with the rise in information and technology and the ability to raise our understanding of the reality we live in, is a testament and is evidence that we are on a timeline of service to others society. Like, we as a collective Earth species have accepted and have acknowledged that we want that for this planet. So with the rise of the internet and how far it's taken off, we can now say that we have entered the positive timeline. However, it can always change because we always have choice, and we're not yet completely out of the struggles and the problems that we're facing. So it can turn at any moment, but choosing on an individual level that you want to be service to others is going to help you, or service to self, because God doesn't care. It sees you as a sovereign, independent, free will consciousness, and whether you choose service to others or not, you will always be God's child in essence, and so in a way you can be confused by the service to self, and how you can actually turn into service to self from service to others in a unconscious and subconscious way, is thinking that they are wrong or bad. Because if you think that they are separate from yourself and that they are evil, then you effectively will become separated from them, and you cannot be of service when you feel like there's a disconnection from them, and all disconnection is ultimately an illusion. The disconnection can only be perceived by thoughts, ideas, and personal perspectives. So we're not truly disconnected from anything or anyone. We're always connected on a mass consciousness scale. So knowing that, we can ultimately love and appreciate service to self people and their decision to behave and act in a way that is selfish, because if we don't honor that in them, then we are not honoring God. We are not honoring the choice of free will, and not honoring the choice of free will in other people, we are impinging and completely infringing upon their own ability to express themselves in the reality that we live in. And if we deny them that, if we limit their expression, then we are limiting ourselves, because we are them. And the more that we oppose them, the more that we oppose ourselves. And they have a complete right to do that, and it's beautiful. Just tell them and say in your mind that what I want is not